Hi, I'm Jen. I make videos about my adventures as a 50-something silver and solo traveler, and today I'm in London. It's my first day. I am here for my very first cruise, but 4 days early, so I'm doing some sightseeing. And today I'm going to Westminster Abbey. But first, oh, look, it's Big Ben. Gotta see that. So, anyhow, I'm also going to go and see the statue of Boudica. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she was an Icene queen back in Roman times and kicked some Roman butt and actually burned London to the ground. So, off to see Boudica. So, I'm a little bit before my entrance time to Westminster Abbey. I booked a ticket online for £27. And if you come in person instead of booking ahead, you may not get a ticket and you might have to wait in line. And it's the same price. So, organize yourself if you want to come. I'm also hoping to get a Verger-led tour, which is someone who works here at the Abbey will guide you through and explain the whole place. Otherwise, you get a free headset with a guided tour in the headset if you don't take the Verger tour. But the Verger tour will take you to the shrine of Saint Edward the Confessor, which is not open to the public ordinarily unless you're with a verger. So I'm hoping to get in with the verger tour. So who is St. Edward and why is he so important? Well, he's the guy who built Westminster Abbey back in the 10s, in the 11th century. Back then, in about 1050, King Edward the Confessor was King of England, and he was obviously a religious man, but he was also a warrior king. And he was in constant wars and battles with both here in England and also across the Channel with France, various factions in France. And by the time 1050 came around, he had no heirs left, and so he had been wheeling and dealing with several of his adversaries, um, offering up one or the other of them to be his heir when he died. So I guess he was starting to feel his age. But around 1050, he decided that he needed to have a church to bury himself in. And he chose a little monastery on the Thames River that was dedicated to St. Peter. And so it was already existing, but he decided this was going to be his royal burial site. And from 1050 until for about 15 years, he renovated and made it larger and more worthy of a royal burial site. And in 1065, it was finally ready and it was consecrated. And 10 days later, Edward the Confessor died. So good planning on Edward. So after he died, he was buried in his newly consecrated Westminster Abbey. And so Edward the Confessor, who is not Edward the First, by the way, he's Edward the Confessor and now Saint Edward. He was the first British monarch, English monarch, buried at Westminster Abbey. So, as I said, he'd been wheeling and dealing with a couple other guys about who would be his heir. And immediately after his death in early 1066, his cousin Harold stepped up and said, "I'm the king," and crowned himself king, and went about the country declaring himself king so everyone would know. And across the Channel in Normandy, the Duke of Normandy, William, heard about this and heard about the death of Edward the Confessor, and he too had been promised to be the heir. And so he said, "Nah." And he gathered up an army and sailed across the English Channel and met Harold at a little field outside of the town of Hastings, and they had a great big battle called the Battle of Hastings in 1066, where William defeated Harold and became King of England, otherwise known as William the Conqueror, by the way. So William the Conqueror, who is William the First of England, and I think you know who William the Fifth will be at some point in time, not now, But William I, William the Conqueror of England, immediately went to Westminster Abbey and had himself crowned king. And so his was the very first coronation of an English monarch at Westminster Abbey. Not bad, eh? St. Edward, Edward the Confessor, first burial, and William the Conqueror is the first coronation. I think there's been 30 something coronations since William I, William the Conqueror, and who knows how many burials at Westminster Abbey since Edward the Confessor. But there have been also weddings. So Princess Diana and then Prince Charles were married at Westminster Abbey, as were Prince William and Catherine. They were also married at Westminster Abbey. Other famous burials at Westminster Abbey, Isaac Newton is buried at Westminster Abbey, and King Edward I, second and third, I believe, are all buried at Westminster Abbey. Stephen Hawking is buried at Westminster Abbey, and Charles Dickens. There are a bunch of other notables, religious, political, and just people, regular people, who were honored with a burial at Westminster Abbey. So yeah, I'm going to go inside, and I would love to see the tomb of St. Edward, Edward the Confessor. I'm not a religious person, but just for the history of it, I would really love to see that. So I think it's almost time for my entrance. They are timed entrances, so you have to wait for your half-hour period to come in. But I think that I'm ready. Hi. So I've made it inside Westminster Abbey, and I am waiting for my Verger-led tour. Verger is someone who works at the Abbey, and they are allowed to take me into the tomb of Edward the Confessor, Saint Edward the Confessor. So I'm back at my pub. I got busted after that last video by one of the vergers at Westminster Abbey. I guess you're not supposed to video inside Westminster Abbey. So all of that was bonus footage, the video part. But I did meet up with my Verger tour group. There were only about 13 of us in it, and you could see the place was just packed. So I don't think that the Verger tours are well known, and you do have to ask at the desk after you're already in order to get into the Verger tour. It's another £10, but I would say it's well worth it. I met up with them and our verger, and we immediately took off towards the nave of the church. And there's a memorial to Winston Churchill there, as well as a large, gorgeous, illuminated portrait of Richard II, King Richard II. He was about 16, the verger said, when the portrait was made. And it's one of the first English monarchs who was captured in a portrait from life rather than from memory. So it's beautiful, gorgeous. Go and see it. And also, Richard II is one of the later architects of Westminster Abbey. So Edward the Confessor decided he was going to build the abbey. Most likely his abbey was wood, and there's not any of it left The verger said maybe some of the foundations, but certainly none of the upper structure. Henry III built a large portion of the older Westminster Abbey, and then Richard II, after him, Richard II was in like the 1300s. He built another large. He built onto what Henry III had built, and there's a really cool. There's a delineation between the two, between Henry III's Westminster Abbey and Richard II's Westminster Abbey. Put a picture up of that. But we also saw the coronation throne, the one that King Charles sat upon to receive his throne, or to receive his crown, and that every English, British monarch has sat upon since a long time ago. I forget what the date was, but it's behind glass. You can't go and sit on it or anything, but very cool. And the stone of Scone goes right beneath the seat, but the stone is returned to Edinburgh for safekeeping. Then we processed up through the screen, a really elaborate screen, and into the choir. And the choir is that long sort of row of seats that the posh people get to sit at when there's some special ceremony going on, and it's usually all roped off. But because we were in the Verger tour, we got to sit in the choir, and I got to sit in the Canada. There's a permanent seat for Canada, Australia, and the UK, and someone else, because they were the original Commonwealth members. And so I got to sit in the Canada one. I'm Canadian, so that was fun. But our Verger was really good and told us a whole bunch of stories about King Charles's coronation. She was there and she participated sort of behind the scenes. Then we walked up to the high altar, and that's where the cosmati pavement is, the cosmati tiling, which Henry III, this was all Henry III's part of the church. Henry III had hired an Italian named Cosmati to create this tiled mosaic floor, and I was sort of mesmerized by it. It's gorgeous. And the high altar is where the king or presumptive king sits in order to be crowned, and it's quite impressive. Also got a shot of Anne of Cleves' tomb at this time. She's buried, or her tomb is right on the high altar off to the side. And if you don't know who Anne of Cleves was, she was Henry VIII's fourth wife, one that he did not behead. He just he set her aside, he divorced her, and it was all amicable. But she was an interesting woman. And then we were off to the tomb of Edward the Confessor, which is why I wanted to take the Verger tour in the beginning. And it's right behind the high altar. And you have to take a small wooden staircase up. It's roped off. Ordinary visitors cannot go in there. It's quite fragile. But our Verger unhooked the rope and told us to go up, and she was meet us inside. There's a circle of chairs surrounding the tomb, and we all went in, and I actually snapped a picture of the icon of St. Edward, which is a beautiful illuminated portrait, it looks like. Before the Virgin came in, and she said she forgot to tell us no photos could be taken in there. So I did get one picture before being told no pictures, but it's very moving, and I'm not a religious person at all, but just, to see how much veneration is made for this man, for his earthly remains, and surrounding his tomb, his crypt, I guess, are the tombs of Henry III, who is a huge fan of Edward the Confessor, as well as Richard II. Obviously, both of them continued the building of Westminster Abbey after him, so they were both fans. Their wives, Henry V, is also buried. His tomb is there as well. It really a very moving experience to be able to go in there. So that was very exciting. And then we exited from St. Edward's tomb and into the Lady Chapel, which is which was built by Henry VII in homage, I guess, to the Virgin Mary. And he and his wife, Elizabeth of York, are buried in there. Their tombs are there, as well as Elizabeth I and Mary I, who are buried. Mary I is buried sort of at ground level, and then Elizabeth I her tomb is directly on top of Mary's. She passed away second, Mary first, and then Elizabeth second. They were half sisters, Tudors, daughters of King Henry VIII. So they are buried together. There's also the tomb of the two princes in the Tower, who were supposedly murdered by Richard III. Still not proven, I don't think. And one whole side alcove is dedicated to the Stuart monarchs, including Mary, Queen of Scots. And if you're a fan of Philippa Gregory's novels, specifically The Red Queen, Margaret Beaufort is also in that side chapel along with Mary, Queen of Scots. Then we exited and we went out to the Poets' Corner, where various writers and artists also have memorials and tombs. And there's a big memorial to Shakespeare, although Shakespeare is not buried at Westminster Abbey. There's a memorial to him and to dozens of other writers and artists. Charles Dickens, he is there, as well as John Dryden. Several others. I'll post pictures of the ones that I got. And I also forgot, we visited Scientists' Corner, and Stephen Hawking was there, and Isaac Newton has a large, ornate, gorgeous monument to Isaac Newton. Several other scientists, again, I'll post pictures, I can't remember them all. But overall, I would say get the Verger tour. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And Westminster Abbey, stunning, stunning. Do it. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you can, and tell me what you think. Correct me on any of my information in the comments below.